Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Brawn Against Brain, an episode of The Incredible Hulk produced by Grant Ray Lawrence Animation and the Marvel Comics Group. So yes, here I go once again, entering the world of the Marvel Superheroes cartoon show from 1966. I was thinking when making notes for this commentary, which show had the best theme song? I mean, they're all great. I think for me, either Captain America or The Incredible Hulk has the best theme song, even though The Mighty Thor is my favourite of the cartoons that appeared within the Marvel Superheroes show. That said, Tony Stark makes you feel he's a cool exec with a heart of steel. That is a pretty iconic lyric.
I want to remain as I am. I want to be the Hulk. I want to... It's too late. It's over.
I love how this episode starts with the Hulk already on screen in a rage as he is aware that he is about to become the puny Bruce Banner once more. So with regards to production, this episode's story is rather interesting, especially within the context of the Hulk cartoons that are a part of the Marvel Superheroes show. For those that don't know, in the comic books, The Incredible Hulk was a bit of a failure. When the character launched in his own comic book in late 1962, after 6 issues, the comic was actually cancelled. That would have been in March of 1963. Crazy to think that a pillar in the Marvel Universe, especially from an early stage, started off so poorly. Although his own title was cancelled, the green-skinned Goliath, you kind of have to affect a Stan Lee voice when uttering that phrase, don't you? As I was saying, when his own title was cancelled, the Hulk continued to appear in other comic books, usually as an antagonistic guest, of course. And Marvel fans loved the character. And Marvel listened to their fans as, over a year later, in October of 1964, the Hulk was given a co-starring appearance in the series known as Tales to Astonish, opposite Giant Man and later the Submariner. Oh, we're about to see Bruce Banner become the Hulk. Just listen.
Too late. Can't resist anymore. And why should I want to be the weak, powerless Bruce Banner?
I love how Max Ferguson goes from the Bruce Banner voice to the Hulk voice. Just perfect. Back to the Hulk's publication history. The reason I bring all of this up is that the Hulk's animated adventures actually jump around quite a bit, from those first 6 issues to his eventual successful appearances in Tales to Astonish. This episode that we're watching, this was from the Hulk's first solo story in Tales to Astonish, and so it was what we would call today a soft reboot of sorts. Another interesting aspect is that we often associate Jack Kirby's name with the Hulk. Of course, I mean, we associate that man's name with much of what formed the Marvel Universe visually. But one of the prominent artists that worked on the Hulk initially was actually Spider-Man artist Steve Ditko. You can notice his style of illustration whenever you see Betty Ross in this episode. So this episode, and a few others, primarily use Steve Ditko's artwork, and given his work on the Spider-Man comic, his iconic style would seem an odd choice for the Hulk. But it works beautifully. And for the fact checkers amongst you, this episode is taken from Tales to Astonish issues 60, 61 and 62.
I've destroyed the unmanned tank with one blow at the robot's arm.
I should also say that with the Hulk stories in this series jumping between the original Hulk comics from 1962 and 1963 and Tales to Astonish from 1964, we get differing takes on the Hulk's personality. The cartoon does try to create some degree of uniformity for the character, but it's hard to disguise the imbalance in writing. When writing those first 6 issues of The Incredible Hulk, Stan Lee wasn't quite sure how to write the character. Thus we saw the slow, methodical Hulk, and by issue 6, a smart, somewhat intelligent Hulk. In addition, Stan Lee was trying to figure out what specifically caused Bruce Banner to turn into the Hulk. I'm not talking about gamma rays, I'm talking about what prompted each and every transformation, because originally it was the fall of night that would cause the transformation. We would often see the tortured Bruce Banner looking fearfully at the moon. Come Tales to Astonish, it was kind of retconned that a spike in Bruce Banner's adrenaline would cause the transformation. So when these cartoons were made, they really were pulling from a variety of creative sources.
Everything is spinning around. I'm changing again. Have to get away before it happens.
And we see the Hulk transform back into Bruce Banner here. Again, Stan Lee was trying to figure out what worked and what didn't when writing these stories. And so here, when the Hulk is at his most stressed, he begins to transform into Bruce Banner. I kind of get what Stan Lee was going for. I always love the animation of the Hulk tumbling down the mountain. As I've said before, even though these are simply illustrated panels, beautifully rendered ones mind, and even though we're seeing limited animation, those producing these cartoons did a rather great job of working within the limitations they were presented with, and managed to bring these comic books to life.
Order of pursuit! On the double!
Oh, Bruce, you're in the clear.
And much like the comic book itself, part 1 comes to an end with the stolen robot wandering the desert. Ugh, must be pretty hot in that archaic robot suit, right? And yes, no one seems to question why Bruce Banner is suddenly sporting ripped purple trousers. And in fairness, I guess this is because they're more confused as to why he's present in this test area in the first place. I mentioned Max Ferguson before. His voicing of both Bruce Banner and the Hulk is one of the things I love about this series. Max was one of the many talented voice actors, primarily with a background as a radio performer, a vocal artist, that worked on the Marvel Superheroes cartoon show from 1966. As I mentioned in my previous commentary, sadly, many voice actors that worked on these shows went uncredited. This was largely down to bulk credits that didn't always take into account every single day of production, when people may be hired for just a day or two, with their names accidentally omitted. In short, bulk credits were easier to put together, just create one set and be done with it. Anyway, back to what we're looking at on screen. And now we're introduced to Major Glenn Talbot. Now, for those that have listened to any of my episode commentaries that cover the Incredible Hulk cartoon from 1982, you'll know that in that series, Major Glenn Talbot was renamed to Major Ned Talbot. And rather than being the handsome, brave and loyal military man which he is presented as in this series, in that 1982 series he's a bit of a buffoon, nicknamed Noodlehead Ned by his colleagues. In the 1982 series, the character is perfectly voiced, with a great deal of bravado and cowardice by the legendary Pat Fraley. Here, Talbot is voiced by a legendary Hollywood presence, an actor with a distinctive voice that is instantly recognisable during both his live action work and his work as a voice actor, John Vernon. He was most notable in the Marvel Superheroes cartoon show for voicing Tony Stark, Iron Man, and also Namor the Submariner. His booming vocal tones work so perfectly with those leads, but here, as Major Glenn Talbot, his voice just gives such strength to this new character. We instantly get a sense that this guy isn't just bravado, he can back it up with his actions, which he does in many an episode. I love this bit coming up as we see a real sense of action and drama. Saving the life of Betty Ross isn't something that Talbot would be seen doing in the 1982 Hulk cartoon, and if he were to do so, it would almost be accidentally. However, this portrayal of Talbot, as I've already said, this guy is a hero, kind of like an Errol Flynn. And now watch this, the energy of this scene leads to, as I've said before, my favourite music cue from the series, Furious Encounter by Ward Sills.
Within this invulnerable robot's body, I'm completely safe from harm.
I should mention that Stan Lee's wonderful caption-based narration in the comic books is pretty much repurposed in these shows for the narrator Bernard Cowan to perform. This piece of narration we just heard, and as the General's daughter seems to see her handsome escort in a new light, a raging human engine of destruction attacks his slower-moving adversary with the fury of an unleashed tornado. That is directly from the comic. And how wonderfully poetic and dramatic does that sound? This bit of the story always makes me chuckle as the Hulk clings on for dear life, ensuring that he doesn't fall into the bottomless pit. Now, I understand why it's referred to as bottomless, but it seems so random. Now here's something maybe someone can tell me. Whatever happened to the unknown spy that stole the robot? I don't recall him ever returning in the comic books unless I completely missed it.
Remember me, Hulk? I fell into that bottomless pit in the 1960s, and now I'm back.
And the Jade Giant saves the day, but the story isn't over yet. As with the comic book, the Hulk will soon find himself captured.
His battered body lies until...
I always find this illustration of the unconscious Hulk interesting because Steve Ditko almost draws him, dare I say, rather handsome. Look at this image upside down. He looks more like Superman than the Hulk facially. I always loved the early stories of the Hulk, with General Ross desperately trying to figure out the connection between Bruce Banner and the Hulk. And amazingly, when you look back at Tales to Astonish, the secret of Bruce Banner and the Hulk being one and the same only lasted for about 17 issues, if that. And the reveal is actually covered in this series when a distraught Rick Jones, believing Bruce Banner to be dead, reveals the tragic connection to Talbot. Though, due to the episodes jumping about continuity-wise, episodes follow with no one being aware that Bruce Banner is the Hulk.
We'll learn where he came from.
I'm afraid of what we'll learn.
Will the Hulk, with his incredible strength, be able to break out of the unbreakable chains?
And part 2 comes to a close with the Hulk, a prisoner of General Ross. So, a little bit of my own personal connection to this episode. I remember seeing this episode on the Wide Awake Club, and my research over the years has deemed this to roughly be around late 1984, which would make sense. Before I continue, here we have the leader, who is presented in shadows because in the corresponding comic book he had yet to be revealed. However, in the cartoon we had already met the leader a couple of times, and yes, Spider-Man villain the Chameleon shows up in this episode. So, as I was saying, I remember that the Wide Awake Club would air random episodes from the Marvel Superheroes show. One week it would be Iron Man, the next it would be the Incredible Hulk. Oddly, I don't ever recall seeing episodes of Captain America, the Mighty Thor, or the Submariner during this time. Even though I was a huge Marvel Comics fan at the time and was more than aware of the heroes and villains that inhabited the Marvel Universe, I wasn't familiar with all the shows that fell under this Marvel Superheroes show banner. That information back in 1984 was simply not readily available. That would all change when my father came home from work one day with a bunch of VHS tapes that, bizarrely, as I'm saying this out loud, I've only just realised filled in the gaps. I'll go into details of the story another time, but my father came through the front door with VHS tapes of Captain America, the Mighty Thor, the Submariner, and the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon. No Iron Man or the Incredible Hulk. That's crazy. And he had no idea which cartoons I had been exposed to on the Wide Awake Club. How weird is that? My father brought home 4 random VHS tapes that actually filled in the blanks as to what shows had been produced.
Bruce Banner is able to easily slip through the chains built to hold the enormous Hulk.
Speaking of VHS tapes, there is a genuine life and death story as to how I finally acquired the VHS tape featuring this episode. 3 years after having seen this episode on the Wide Awake Club, I saw that, of all places, Toys R Us was selling the VHS that this episode was featured on. Now, I say of all places because, at least over here in the UK at the time, VHS tapes weren't sold in Toys R Us. I still remember seeing the VHS tape in a glass booth alongside numerous other random cartoons. I so desperately wanted that VHS because even back then they were hard to obtain. Anyway, a few weeks later it was my 10th birthday. It's August of 1987 for those keeping track. My father took me to Toys R Us and I was intent on buying the video. To cut a very long story short, on that day I nearly died. My excitement got the better of me and I found myself outside of Toys R Us with pieces of glass wedged into my skin and me basically inches away from death. Pretty dramatic, right? Obviously I survived and would eventually pick up that VHS of The Incredible Hulk, and even though I had nearly died procuring that VHS, years later I recorded over it. One day I will stumble upon that VHS again, I'm determined to. It's probably one of the rarest VHS tapes released by Guild Home Video over here in the UK. And for those wondering, I will tell that Toys R Us story in full on this channel. I've actually already written the script, I just need to find a good way to present it, assuming you want to hear it, that is. And we're going to see the Hulk go into action once more. You can't keep a good captured scientist down. And yeah, in this series, even though Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created and developed numerous strong female figures in the Marvel Universe, during this time Betty Ross really wasn't one of them, often being the damsel in distress. Although she does show great courage in the face of danger when captured by Boomerang and saved by the Hulk. But again, she was often being saved from the latest bad guy. It wouldn't be until the 1982 Hulk cartoon that we saw an awesome Betty Ross, a strong-willed scientist working alongside Bruce Banner and never suffering fools, even saving the day on more than one occasion. But yeah, this Betty Ross, she's good at being saved.
Footsteps behind me. A patrol is attacking.
Of course, as with most interpretations of the Hulk, as he attempts to save the day, General Ross's troops attempt to capture him. Oh, I should mention one thing. In the comic book, Rick Jones actually shows up in this part of the story, aiding Bruce Banner. However, at least here in this episode, his inclusion really isn't necessary. And as this story reaches its conclusion, I should also mention that in the finale of this issue, the leader is teased, who himself would be revealed in the following issue, tirelessly working on his humanoids, whilst kindly revealing his origin to the reader. But as I said earlier, in the cartoon, we've already met him and seen that particular story play out in animated form. And so, under the cloak of darkness, a little too dark if you ask me, Bruce Banner returns home, tattered trousers and all. This is probably one of my favourite episodes from the Hulk cartoons, though there are many, many more that I adore. And in this series, on a couple of occasions, we even see the Hulk wearing his infamous purple underpants. We'll get there. And that's the end of this episode commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.